Black billionaire denied service at his own car dealership. Manager fired instantly. "You can't afford that car. Let me save you the embarrassment." Those were the exact words that echoed through the sleek, modern showroom of Elkridge Elite Motors in downtown Atlanta. The sales manager, a smug, sharply dressed white man in his early 40s named Darren Cole, barely looked up from his iPad as he addressed the black man standing calmly across the glossy white floor. Jalen Carter, dressed in black jeans, a casual white t-shirt under a tailored bomber jacket, and a black Yankees cap, simply raised an eyebrow. At 6'3", with a quiet authority in his presence, he didn't need to say a word to command a room, but he didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Instead, he gently placed the black card, an American Express Centurion, on the glass desk between them. Darren let out a short, derisive laugh. "Cute. They let you carry that now. Look, man, this dealership caters to real buyers, not Instagram clout chasers. You want to take a few selfies? Make it quick." Behind Jalen, a young couple froze mid-conversation. A security guard turned his head. Two junior salesmen by the espresso bar exchanged wide-eyed glances, but nobody stepped in. Nobody said a word. Jalen slowly picked up the card, looked Darren in the eyes, and said softly, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your career." He turned and walked out, silent, poised, unbothered. Darren smirked and tapped something on his tablet. "Security will delete the footage." No big deal. But it was a big deal. 20 minutes later, chaos broke out in the back office. A black SUV pulled into the reserved executive parking spot. Out stepped a woman in a navy power suit, heels clicking with intent. Ava Thompson, COO of Carter Group Holdings, walked straight into the general manager's office with fire in her eyes. "You need to get Jalen on the line, now," she snapped at the receptionist, who looked ready to faint. Back in the dealership's camera room, the security feed had been mysteriously wiped. But what Darren didn't know was that Jalen had already texted a private investigator, and that every word, every smirk, had been caught by a hidden mic sewn inside his jacket. A precaution Jalen had started taking long ago, not because he expected trouble, but because experience had taught him that when you're black and powerful, people often forget the second part. What nobody in that showroom realized was that the man they dismissed was the owner of the entire Carter automotive empire, a luxury dealership network that spanned 5 states and employed over 2,000 people. Elkridge Elite Motors had been acquired just 6 weeks earlier, in a quiet deal negotiated through a shell company, a strategic part of Carter's expansion plan. The staff hadn't even been told yet. He wanted to observe how they operated before rebranding. And now, he had his answer. That evening, a mandatory staff meeting was called. Darren strutted into the conference room like he owned the place, oblivious to the storm heading his way. But as he took his seat, the projector screen flickered on. There, in high definition, was himself, leaning over the desk, mocking Jalen's card, laughing, belittling. The room went dead silent. Then the lights came up. And Jalen walked in, no security, no entourage. Just presence. Pure, undeniable presence. Half the room stood. The rest fumbled to follow. Darren froze in place, mouth open. Jalen didn't raise his voice. Didn't gloat. He simply turned to the general manager. "This man represents your values?" he asked quietly. The GM shook his head, already sweating through his collar. "Absolutely not. Darren Cole, you're relieved of your duties, effective immediately." "But wait," Darren stammered. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Jalen said. "You judged me on sight." "And that's not something I can fix with a memo." Then he turned to the rest of the staff. "I built this company from the ground up. I know every nut and bolt, every dollar in and out. I've mopped the floors and signed the million-dollar checks. And I need people around me who respect everyone who walks through that door. The room burst into applause. Outside, reporters were already gathering. Someone had leaked the footage. It was going viral. Jalen stepped out into the sunlight, not smiling, but resolved. And this was just the beginning. The next morning, news outlets exploded with headlines. Billionaire owner denied service at his own dealership. Carter Motors exec fired after racially charged incident. Jalen Carter silently shuts down discrimination, one dealership at a time. Cable anchors debated the footage. Social media was ablaze with the video of Darren's humiliation and Jalen's composed response. Hashtags like #BlackExcellence, "You fired yourself," and #CarterMotors. Truth trended for hours, but while the public was celebrating a moment of justice, Jalen was at the Carter Group's high-rise office in Buckhead, Georgia, deep in strategy mode. Sitting across from him was Ava Thompson, his sharp, no-nonsense COO and longtime confidant. "We've got 2 fires," Ava said, tapping her iPad. "1, the board is getting cold feet about the Elkridge acquisition. They're nervous about the media attention. 2, Darren's threatening to sue, claims he was set up." Jalen leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Let him try. He signed a morality clause. He's on camera violating every principle we stand for." "Agreed," Ava said. "But the lawsuit will be noisy. He's already got one of those grievance-hungry law firms circling him." Jalen stood and looked out the glass window over the Atlanta skyline. "I didn't plan to reveal my ownership this way." "But maybe this is the way it had to be." He turned back toward Ava. "You remember why I bought Elkridge? To expand the brand into the Northeast Corridor?" "No. I bought it because 2 years ago my nephew was refused a test drive there." "They assumed he stole the hoodie he was wearing. Kid's 15. Ava's expression hardened. "You never told me that." "I needed to see if the culture had changed." "Clearly it hasn't." There was a long pause. Then Jalen said, "Let's do the audit." Ava raised an eyebrow. "The full audit? HR, sales, management, everything?" Jalen nodded. "Everything. I want to know how deep this rot goes." Meanwhile, across town, Darren Cole sat hunched at his dining table, a bottle of whiskey sweating beside his laptop. His phone was vibrating non-stop, calls from news reporters, old friends, and even his ex-wife. But it was the call from a man named Miles Harper that finally made him pick up. "Darren," Miles said, voice slick with confidence. "You've just been handed a golden ticket." "Excuse me?" Darren croaked. "You were fired for asking a few questions. This isn't about discrimination, it's about silencing dissent. We can spin this?" "Trust me," Darren blinked. "You're saying I'm the victim here?" "Exactly. The billionaire set you up." "You didn't know who he was. He orchestrated the whole thing to boost his brand. You were the fall guy." Darren's shame curled into something else, something darker. And so the first strike came 2 days later. A whistleblower complaint was filed anonymously against Carter Group Holdings, accusing them of racial favoritism, workplace bias, and financial irregularities. It wasn't real. Jalen and Ava knew that. But it forced an internal review, giving Darren and his allies time to muddy the waters. The twist: one of the employees who supported the complaint was a junior associate from Elkridge, someone Jalen had never even met. "Why would he do that?" Ava asked during a late-night meeting. "Desperation," Jalen replied. "Or maybe someone offered him something." Now Jalen had to shift gears. He called in Tasha Reynolds, an independent investigator and former FBI agent with a reputation for cutting through chaos. Tasha was tough, brilliant, and, perhaps most importantly, unimpressed by power. "Jalen," she said during their first meeting, "you want this to stay clean. I need access to everything." "Phones, emails, internal docs. Even your texts." "Done," he said without hesitation. As the investigation began, Tasha's team started uncovering things no one expected. Irregular commissions, managers fudging customer credit reports, sales reps adding suspicious surcharges for Black and Latino buyers. It wasn't just Darren. The cancer ran deeper. Meanwhile, Darren launched a press tour. With Miles Harper by his side, he framed himself as the cancelled American, ruined for simply doing his job. The media split. Some condemned him, others gave him airtime, but Jalen stayed silent. Until one morning, when a woman walked into Carter HQ and asked to speak to him. She was in her early 60s, black, elegant, with silver-streaked dreadlocks. Her name was Mrs. Eloise Dawson. "I saw what you did on the news," she said softly, "and I wanted to thank you. My husband was denied a car loan at Elkridge 3 years ago. He had perfect credit. They told him the computer was down." Jalen sat forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He died a year later. Heart attack. I can't say that place killed him, but I know what it did to his pride." Her voice cracked. "You stood up for people like him?" Jalen didn't speak. He simply stood and offered her his hand. In that moment, the mission became clearer than ever. This wasn't about a dealership anymore, it was about dignity, and Darren had no idea what storm he had just unleashed. 3 weeks had passed since the scandal first broke, but the battle was far from over. If anything, the war had only just begun. Carter Motors' executive offices were humming with investigators, compliance officers, and external auditors. What was once a quiet, buttoned-up corporate environment had turned into a storm of questions, checklists, and locked file drawers. Jalen Carter was at the center of it all. His phone buzzed. It was Tasha Reynolds. "Need you downstairs," she said. "Now!" He took the elevator straight to the security floor. Tasha met him at the door with a hard look in her eyes. "We found something," she said. "One of your sales managers at Elkridge, Cody Banks, has been running a side racket." "Fake warranty packages. Thousands of dollars skimmed off high-end buyers. Guess who those buyers mostly were?" Jalen already knew the answer. "Black families, single mothers, first-time car owners," Tasha continued. "It's bigger than we thought." Jalen ran a hand down his face. "How long?" 3 years. It was a punch to the gut. Jalen had hoped Darren was a bad apple. But now rot was showing in the tree itself. "I want him out," Jalen said flatly. "Fired." "Today?" Tasha nodded. "He's already gone. But here's the twist. He's talking." "Talking?" "To Darren." "They're connected. They used to work together in Denver. This isn't just coincidence." "It's coordinated." Jalen's blood ran cold. "So this whole mess could be part of a setup," she finished. Later that evening, Ava stormed into his office with a printout. "You're not gonna like this," she warned. It was a leak, an anonymous blog post with documents attached, allegations that Jalen had deliberately orchestrated the entire dealership scandal as a marketing ploy. That he had baited Darren, that he had manipulated the footage. The blog was already viral. "This came from the inside," Ava said. "No one outside the company has access to internal memos like this." Jalen scanned the document. And then something clicked. "This line here," he said, tapping one sentence. "Carter's team edited the security footage before releasing it publicly. That's not true." "But someone wants people to believe it is," Ava replied. Jalen paused. Only 3 people knew we were going to release the raw footage. You, Tasha, and Erica. Ava looked shocked. You think Erica would leak this? She's head of PR, Jalen said. She had access, but there was more. Erica had been unusually quiet lately, working remote, avoiding calls. When Ava called her office, her assistant answered and said she was on leave, without notifying anyone. Jalen's gut turned. The next day, Tasha launched a quiet internal probe. And by nightfall, they had the smoking gun. Erica had been paid by an outside consulting firm, connected to Miles Harper. It was subtle. Buried in a shell company, but the trail was there. She's been feeding them information, Tasha confirmed. Probably for months. I trusted her, Jalen said, his voice cold. She worked with me since Carter Tech. She's been in my home. Now it wasn't just betrayal. It was personal. The fallout was immediate. Jalen released a statement the next morning confirming Erica's termination. He didn't say why, but the media guessed quickly. Yet despite the chaos, the public support hadn't wavered. In fact, it had grown. Stories like Mrs. Dawson's kept flooding in. People sharing how they were denied loans, test drives, or basic respect at places like Elkridge. And then, in a twist no one saw coming, one of Jalen's old college professors appeared on national television, Professor Lionel Moore. I taught Jalen Carter at Howard, he told CNN. And I know the kind of man he is. He doesn't need marketing stunts to prove his worth. What happened to him is what happens to countless Black Americans every day, only this time it was caught on camera. The tide shifted again. But Darren wasn't finished. He filed a civil suit for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. The media lapped it up. Jalen refused to be dragged into a war of words. Instead, he countered with a bold move. He launched Project Restore, a company-wide initiative to reform every dealership under the Carter brand. Transparent pricing, blind application reviews, anonymous feedback portals, monthly equity audits, and most importantly, a public accountability council, made up of community members, not executives. At the press conference, Jalen stood in front of a crowded room and said, I didn't build Carter Motors just to sell cars. I built it because I believe every person deserves respect the moment they walk in the door, regardless of their color, income, or zip code. We failed, and I own that, but starting today, we fix it. Applause thundered through the room. Backstage, Ava whispered, You're declaring war on the old way of doing business. Good, Jalen said. It's about time. Across town, Darren watched the live stream on his cracked iPad. He threw it across the room, then picked up his phone and dialed Miles. We need to hit him harder, he snapped. I don't care how. I want him ruined. But Miles was already smiling. I've got something, he said. Something Jalen buried a long time ago. Trust me. This one will hurt. And just like that, the stakes were raised once again. The past was coming back. And this time, it wasn't just about business. It was about survival. The silence in Jalen's penthouse that night was different. Not peaceful, but loaded. Like the moment before a storm breaks the horizon. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, gripping a tumbler of water in his hand, replaying Miles's smug voice in his head. I've got something. Jalen had spent years ensuring there was nothing in his past that could be used against him. Nothing to bury. Nothing to haunt. He built his empire brick by brick, clean. But the look on Miles's face during that last press conference replay gnawed at him. This wasn't just another PR stunt. Miles was digging, and whatever he'd found, he believed it was nuclear. Tasha barged in without knocking. You need to see this, she said, throwing a file onto his table. "It's spreading." He flipped open the folder, only to find a series of Reddit threads and anonymous tweets showing screenshots from what looked like court records. Real names redacted, but someone had pieced together Jalen's involvement in a decade-old wrongful termination lawsuit, one he had privately settled before Carter Motors even existed. "That case was sealed," he said. "Yeah, well, not anymore," Tasha replied. "They're spinning it as evidence of a pattern of deception. One blog even says you coerced the whistleblower." "That's a lie," Jalen said sharply. "I know, but the way they're framing it..." "It looks shady." Ava entered moments later, laptop in hand, face pale. "It's gone viral. How's Cancel Carter is trending. They've clipped an old interview of you saying, 'I don't owe anyone explanations.' It's totally out of context, but it's working." Jalen felt the pressure behind his temples build. "I'm not hiding. I've never hidden," he said quietly. "No," Ava said, "but perception is louder than truth right now." That night, Jalen made a decision. He would go on the offensive. Instead of retreating into silence, he called a live town hall. Not with lawyers, not with PR handlers. With real people. The audience was raw, angry. Curious, some supporters, some skeptics. Every emotion, every question, live. Jalen took the stage. "I'm not perfect," he began. "And I'm not a victim. I'm a man who built something bigger than myself. And yes, I've made hard decisions along the way, but I've never deceived the people who believe in me." The crowd shifted. People leaned in. "You heard about that case, let's talk about it." "The woman involved, she's not anonymous to me. Her name is Cynthia Banks. She was fired, yes. But not by me. She was part of a restructure at the tech startup I founded before Carter Motors even existed. I personally reached out after the settlement to help her land on her feet. But the media won't tell you that, because the truth doesn't sell." He paused, let the silence breathe. What we're fighting isn't just bad headlines. It's a system that doesn't want people like us in power unless we play quiet. I'm done playing quiet. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real. After the town hall, Jalen stayed until midnight speaking one-on-one with people in the lobby. A black veteran in his 70s shook his hand and whispered, "Don't back down. They always try to break us when we rise too far." But the backlash didn't die. Instead, Miles Harper escalated. A leaked email from a Carter Motors executive, taken wildly out of context, surfaced. It appeared to show racial bias in hiring decisions, using coded language. Jalen was furious. "This isn't real," he told Tasha. "No, it is," she admitted. "It's real, but it's 5 years old." "And the exec? We already fired him, quietly." "Before Project Restore, but we didn't make that public. Then we make it public now." The next morning, Carter Motors issued a transparent breakdown of internal misconduct cases handled over the past 5 years. Names, actions taken, reforms implemented. It was the kind of radical transparency few companies dared to attempt. The public took notice. And then came the twist no one expected. Cynthia Banks herself, yes, the woman from the old lawsuit, went on video. In it, she praised Jalen. "He didn't wrong me, he helped me. I hate that people are using my story like a weapon against him. I stand with Jalen Carter." The video went viral. Overnight, the tide shifted. And just as Miles was about to drop what he called the final nail, the floor fell out from under him. An investigative journalist named Dominique Lewis published an exposé on Miles. Bribery. Coercion. Evidence tampering. Turns out Miles had manufactured much of the smear campaign. And Erica, the PR traitor, had been paid through a dummy corporation he controlled. The story exploded. For the first time in weeks, Jalen smiled. Not because he had won, but because justice was beginning to catch up. Still, he knew it wasn't over. He looked at Ava. "They'll come again," he said. "Let them," she replied. "We're stronger now." And as Jalen stood in the Carter Motors flagship showroom, shaking hands with a new young hire, a woman from the very neighborhood he grew up in, he knew something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just about cars anymore. This was about reclaiming dignity. And no lie, no leak, no smear would ever steal that back from him again. It started with a knock at the back office door of the Carter Motors Detroit showroom. Tasha looked up from her laptop, eyebrows furrowed. "No one's supposed to be here this late." She opened the door to find a man in his mid-30s with wireframe glasses and a badge that read, Internal Compliance Auditor. His name was Brian Wexler, and he wasn't here on a courtesy call. "I'm here on behalf of the Carter Motors Board," he said. "We're conducting a rapid assessment following recent PR volatility and leaked information suggesting a breach of fiduciary responsibility." Tasha blinked. "You think Jalen's the breach?" "I'm not here to think. I'm here to audit." By morning, every regional manager knew something big was happening. Employees walked on eggshells. Rumors spread like wildfire. That Carter Motors, the company built on transparency and second chances, was turning on itself. Jalen was in LA at the time, speaking at a minority entrepreneurs conference. When he got the call from Tasha, his tone was icy. "They sent in corporate babysitters? Without talking to me?" "It gets worse," Tasha said. "The board's considering suspending you from day-to-day operations pending review. Miles is pushing hard behind the scenes." Jalen didn't respond immediately. He looked out over the Pacific Ocean, fists clenched. "They think I'll roll over." Ava, who had flown in with him, chimed in. "Maybe it's time we stop reacting and start going on the offensive. What if we force the board's hand? How? Give them the real story. Not just of what's happening now, but why Carter Motors exists. Remind people what this brand stands for. You." Tasha added, "What if we host a live Inside Carter event, streamed nationwide, from the very place they tried to humiliate you?" "The Detroit flagship." "Where Miles tried to make me disappear," Jalen said. His voice sharpened. "Good. Let's do it." Over the next 48 hours, their team worked around the clock. They contacted former interns, current employees, customers from underserved communities, anyone whose life had been impacted by Jalen's vision. And then, as the board prepared for a closed-door vote on Jalen's suspension, he dropped the hammer. He walked into the Detroit showroom, cameras rolling, greeted not by executives, but by real people. A single mother from the east side of Detroit who'd bought her first electric car on a sliding-scale payment plan. A teenage mechanic Jalen had sponsored through trade school. A disabled veteran who had received a job through the company's reintegration program. Each took the mic and shared their story. And when Jalen finally spoke, the tone was electric. "They want to make this about profit, but Carter Motors was never built for the rich. It was built for people like us. And I will not let that vision die because some boardroom parasite sees an opportunity to hijack something he didn't build." The video went viral in under 3 hours, but the twist came later that night. Miles Harper held a press conference of his own. He claimed Jalen had used unapproved discretionary funds to make undocumented donations to causes tied to personal interest. On screen, he displayed what appeared to be wire transfers from a Carter Motors account to an obscure non-profit in Atlanta. Jalen stared at the footage from his office. "That's my mother's community center," he said quietly. "We've funded it for years. But we never listed it as a direct corporate donation," Ava said. "We channeled it through a foundation arm. That's not fraud. It's ethics." Miles made it look dirty. Tasha nodded. And the board's buying it. The phone rang. It was Wexler. Mr. Carter. Effective immediately. Your executive privileges are suspended pending a full financial inquiry. Click. Jalen stood motionless for several seconds. Then he turned to Ava and said, "Get me Dominique Lewis." She blinked. The reporter who exposed Miles? If Miles wants war, Jalen said, voice firm, I'll give him a war built on truth. Later that night, Jalen sat across from Dominique in a quiet, low-lit lounge. "I'm not here to beg for coverage," he said. "I'm here to give you everything, the receipts, the records. The history. If we're going to air dirty laundry, let's start with who really built Carter Motors." Dominique studied him carefully. "And what's in it for you?" "Justice," he said. "And the chance to remind this country who really owns power." She leaned forward. "Then let's make it count." What followed over the next few days would change everything. Because Dominique had her own bomb to drop, something no one, not even Jalen, expected. She had found a connection between Miles Harper and a shell company funneling lobbying money through regulatory loopholes to block Carter Motors' expansion into federal vehicle contracts. Miles wasn't just trying to destroy Jalen. He was trying to take over the entire company for personal gain. Suddenly, the narrative changed again. And this time, Jalen wasn't the one being hunted. He was the one setting the trap. The buzz was undeniable. Dominique Lewis's exposé dropped at midnight and lit up the internet like wildfire. Every news outlet from CNN to grassroots automotive blogs picked it up within hours. Headlines read, "Miles Harper, linked to shell companies in bid to hijack Carter Motors." Inside Carter Motors' boardroom the next morning, chaos reigned. Miles sat at the head of the long walnut table, eyes darting between board members whispering to each other, clutching their phones. For once, he didn't have control. The smirk he wore so easily was gone. "Don't believe everything you read," he said. "This is all a media stunt orchestrated by Jalen." But the evidence was too concrete. Wire transfers, email correspondences, even a whistleblower from the lobbying firm had come forward. Board chairwoman Renee Caldwell narrowed her eyes at Miles. "Tell me you didn't use this company to line your own pockets while trying to take down the very man who built it." He tried to stand tall. "I did what was necessary to protect the brand." Renee didn't blink. "From its founder." Just then, the double doors swung open. Jalen walked in, dressed in a dark charcoal suit, no tie, calm but commanding. Cameras followed closely behind as members of the press were invited to witness what would later be called the reckoning at Carter Motors. "You wanted to suspend me," Jalen said, eyes locked on Miles. "Now I'm asking for something different." He paused, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "A vote." Gasps echoed around the room. Renee leaned forward. "You're requesting a full shareholder vote?" "No," Jalen replied. "I'm requesting an emergency board vote. Today, to remove Miles Harper from all leadership and advisory positions, effective immediately." Miles scoffed. "You think they'll just hand it to you?" "I think they've seen enough." Board members exchanged glances. The air was thick. Then, one by one, they spoke. "I vote yes," said Director Malik Stern, tapping his pen. "Yes," said Deborah Kane. "He's a liability now." The votes poured in. 6 yes, 1 abstain, 1 no. It was done. Miles Harper was officially removed. But Jalen wasn't finished. He turned toward the press. "I want to thank the team members who stood up. The people who believed this brand was more than a logo. Carter Motors started as a vision to give voice, access, and dignity to communities left behind by the system. Today isn't just about justice. It's about reaffirming that vision. Applause broke out, even among the board. Miles, humiliated, stood quietly, eyes filled with a mixture of fury and disbelief. His face twitched, but he said nothing. Security came to escort him out. He resisted briefly, then raised his hands and walked. Outside the building, Ava waited by the company SUV, a storm of reporters circling her. When she saw Jalen step out, her eyes lit up. "You did it!" "No," he said, sliding in beside her. "We did it." But just when it seemed the storm had passed, Tasha's voice came through the speakerphone. "Jalen, there's one more thing." "What is it?" "Legal just got notified. The Department of Transportation wants to open a formal review. Not into us, but into Harper's lobbying activities. They think it may tie to federal contract manipulation." Ava turned toward Jalen. "You think this could bring more heat?" "I think we're not just cleaning house anymore," he said. "We're taking on the whole neighborhood." But the real twist came the next morning. Dominique called from New York. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Jalen, I just got a tip from an insider in D.C. Apparently Miles wasn't acting alone." Jalen's tone darkened. "Go on." "There's a group of private investors, mostly old money elites, who've been quietly buying up shares of Carter Motors. Their goal? Strip it down. Rebrand it, and gut your social impact programs in the name of profit." He went still. "And Miles was just their front man." "Exactly. And without him, they're regrouping. Fast." Jalen exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "Then this isn't over." "No," Dominique said. "This is just beginning." The call ended. Jalen sat in the morning light, the city below him already alive. Ava entered with 2 coffees. "Everything okay?" He took a sip and looked her in the eyes. "No, but we're finally fighting the right war." She nodded. "Let's make sure we win it." And in that moment, it was no longer about the dealership, no longer about one incident of racism or sabotage. It was about reclaiming power, protecting legacy, and proving that even billionaires have to fight for what's right. Rain tapped gently against the window of Jalen's penthouse office as he stared out across the city, lost in thought. The events of the past few weeks had left a scar deeper than anyone on the outside could see. Miles was gone. The board was cleaned up, but Dominique's warning echoed louder with each passing hour. "They're coming," she had said. "And this time they won't use the front door." Jalen's phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant. "Meeting at HQ. Lawyers, PR, Dominique." "Urgent." He straightened his tie, grabbed his coat, and headed down. At Carter Motors HQ, the mood was electric, part anxiety, part defiance. Inside the conference room, Tasha, Ava, Dominique, and their legal counsel sat in tense silence. A large screen showed a presentation deck with a single slide. The Syndicate, Private Power versus Public Mission. Dominique stood. "We just uncovered the names behind the investor group, trying to hijack the company. They've been operating through offshore accounts and proxy firms, but we finally traced the thread." She clicked. The screen populated with names. One stood out. Charles Whitmore III. Ava's eyes narrowed. "The hedge fund guy?" Dominique nodded. "And one of the loudest voices in the anti-DEI investment lobby." Jalen leaned forward. "What's his angle?" "He doesn't care about cars," Dominique said. "He wants Carter's data. EV research, supply chain patents, consumer demographics. And he knows that if he can discredit you, or buy the board, he'll take over within 6 months." Tasha chimed in. "He's already offered to buy controlling shares from smaller stakeholders. We've lost 3 already." Jalen's jaw tensed. "Then it's time to take the gloves off." Ava looked at him. "What do you mean?" "We go public. Not just with the fight, but with the mission. A full-scale national campaign, truth, vision, legacy. We remind the public who we are and why Carter Motors matters. Let them try to fight that. The room hesitated. Then Dominique smiled. I've been waiting for that. The next day, Carter Motors launched Happy Drive with Purpose, a social campaign featuring interviews with staff, community organizers, customers, and former employees who had benefited from the company's programs. Stories of second chances, economic empowerment, and local investment flooded social media. But the real play came with Jalen's live address. Broadcast from a community-built Carter EV showroom in Atlanta, he stood before a crowd of over 500 and millions online. I wasn't born into privilege, he began. I built this brand from scratch, not just to sell cars, but to prove what Black excellence, ownership, and community empowerment look like. His voice didn't waver. Now there are those who would tear that down, not because we're failing, but because we're succeeding on our own terms. They're betting we'll stay silent, that we'll retreat, but they forgot one thing. This brand doesn't belong to them. It belongs to all of us. The crowd roared. Back in New York, Charles Whitmore watched the live stream in his penthouse. He didn't flinch, but the room around him was quiet. He's smarter than we thought, one of his associates said. Whitmore poured himself a drink. Smarter, yes. But still playing defense. He swirled the whiskey, then added, We'll leak the audit. What audit? The one we're fabricating, alleging misuse of philanthropic funds. We frame it as internal whistleblower concerns. The associate hesitated. Won't that backfire? Whitmore smiled coldly. Not if we control the narrative first. 2 days later, headlines broke across business media. Carter Motors, under review for alleged misuse of funds. The timing was brutal. Investor confidence dipped. The stock wobbled. And worst of all, federal regulators took interest. Tasha stormed into Jalen's office. We just got hit with a subpoena. He looked up, calm but stern. Good, he said. She blinked. Good? It means we get to show everything. Full transparency. We don't just fight fire with fire. We drown it in truth. That night, Jalen went live again, this time from his childhood neighborhood in Baltimore, standing in front of the very lot where he'd fixed up cars as a teen. This is where it all started, he said, and this is where I'll make it clear. We have nothing to hide. He walked through financial records, on-screen donor reports, community investment breakdowns. He even brought in independent auditors to verify every number. By morning, public opinion had swung again. The hashtag Built by Truth trended worldwide, and Whitmore, he made one fatal mistake. He tried to push the audit to a federal investigator who happened to be Ava's cousin. Within hours, the scheme was exposed. Whistleblower statements revealed emails that had been doctored. Legal teams traced the fabrication back to Whitmore's firm. It was now Whitmore in the spotlight. Dominique called Jalen the next day. You flipped it. Again. I didn't flip anything, he said. I just told the truth louder than they told lies. And in that truth, a movement was forming, one that no hedge fund could buy out, no manager could shut down, and no boardroom could ignore. But the real reckoning was still ahead. The courtroom was packed, not because of a high-profile murder trial, not because of some celebrity scandal, but because the people wanted to see justice. And this time, justice wore a tailored navy blue suit and spoke with calm, unshakable precision. Jalen Carter sat quietly at the witness table, not as a defendant, not as a plaintiff, but as a man finally ready to pull the curtain all the way back. Across from him sat Charles Whitmore, flanked by his legal team, now visibly rattled. Just a week prior, Whitmore had been the predator. Now he looked like prey. The federal inquiry into Carter Motors had taken a sharp turn. What began as a fabricated whistleblower complaint had unraveled into a wide-scale corporate sabotage scandal. One that implicated not only Whitmore, but several board members of competing automotive giants. Ava sat behind Jalen, a hand resting on her notepad, watching every move. "Mr. Carter," the lead attorney began, "can you explain why you refused to settle this matter quietly?" Jalen leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Because silence is how injustice survives. They wanted to shut me up, buy me out, erase what we built. But Carter Motors was never just about cars. It was about proving we belong, that our voice matters, that our presence in these boardrooms, these industries, is not charity, it's legacy." A murmur rippled through the audience. The attorney nodded. "Can you confirm that you personally funded the whistleblower investigation into your own company?" "Yes," Jalen replied. "Because the truth doesn't need protection. It needs light." Across the room, Whitmore's lawyer whispered frantically into his ear. Too late. The judge interjected. "We've reviewed the full report. The court recognizes the actions of Charles Whitmore and his associates as deliberate attempts to manipulate markets, discredit a business based on race and ownership, and defraud investors." She looked directly at Whitmore. "You are hereby ordered to pay damages in the amount of $200 million and are referred to the Department of Justice for further investigation." Gasps echoed, but Jalen didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes for a beat. Later that day, outside the courthouse, a sea of cameras and microphones waited. Dominique stood beside him, with Ava, Tasha, and several Carter Motors employees. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Carter, how do you feel knowing the truth finally came out?" He looked around at the crowd, the community. "The future. I feel like this is just the beginning," he said, "because this fight wasn't just mine. It belongs to every black entrepreneur denied a loan, every woman shut out of a boardroom, every kid who was told they'd never own anything." He paused. "We proved them wrong, and we're just getting started." That night, a viral video exploded across social media. A montage of the entire journey. Jalen walking into his own dealership and being denied service. The slow unraveling of the scheme. The truth revealed. The courtroom climax. It ended with a simple message. Own your name. Own your power. #BuiltByTruth. Tasha posted it to the Carter Motors YouTube channel. It crossed 2 million views in 48 hours. In the final scene, Jalen stood at the entrance of the dealership that had once turned him away. Now, it bore a new name, Carter Legacy Auto. And on opening day, he personally welcomed every customer. Even Marcus, the fired manager who, surprisingly, had written an open apology online. Jalen invited him to the launch. "People change," he said. "But they need a reason to." The press loved it, but more importantly, so did the people. One reporter asked, "Jalen, if you had one thing to say to the next young entrepreneur watching this story, what would it be?" He smiled. "Your worth isn't determined by who sees you. It's defined by what you build when no one's watching. Keep building." And with that, the story that started in rejection ended in revolution. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and real change. This is more than just storytelling, it's a movement. Let's keep it going.